China is seeking support from other countries to unite against President Trump over his crushing tariff plan. But Beijing met with wariness after years of, quote, coercive economic behavior. That's according to the New York Times. This is the Trump administration says it's negotiating with more than 70 countries as they push for them to limit dealings with China in exchange for tariff reductions. China reportedly open to talks with the U.S., but with many reported stipulations, including the U.S., quote, showing respect and naming a point person to lead negotiations. Let's bring in Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good morning. And I also want to say you have a brand new op-ed on foxnews.com that just was published within the last hour. You say China's in bad shape and in no condition to sustain this trade war. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, well, they reported 5.4% growth from Q1, but that is ludicrous because we're seeing the price data for March showed China's in a deflationary spiral. You know, CPI down 2 straight months, PPI, factory gate prices, down 30 straight months. That is inconsistent with the notion of a robust economy. Plus, also, they got their debt crisis. Their 2008 in slow motion is occurring now. You got the collapse in the property prices that have already occurred. And the other thing is that Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the basis of the Chinese economy. So his only way out is to export more. President Trump has just closed off the world's biggest consumer market by far. I mean, I don't know what Xi Jinping's going to do because Chinese factories have been closing now, and this is just a crisis for him. Well,
give me the investor perspective on that, Mark, of what he's saying.
All right, so I'm going to get very specific here. So we looked at NVIDIA and AMD yesterday, down 7-ish%. Obviously, the administration barred sale of some of the AI chips that they make to China. What I'm reading now is that Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, just arrived in Beijing, not wearing his typical motorcycle black leather jacket, but instead wearing a suit and tie. Remember, China mentioned that they want respect when it comes to trade. Is there anything we should be reading into that kind of a meeting?
Well, of course, you know, NVIDIA wants to sell more chips to China, and it's allowed a lot of its chips to be sold through China through transshipment through Singapore and other places, which it knew what was going on. You know, shame on them. But the point here is that once the U.S. starts really restricting chip flows to China, China's AI dreams have really run into a lot of turbulence then. And because everyone says that the struggle for the 21st century is AI, China's in trouble there as well.
You know, the New York Times has an op-ed this morning. It's not hard to imagine a Chinese-led global economy. But what you're saying, and Mark's point, flies in the face of what the New York Times is writing.
Yeah, and it flies in the face of the New York Times reporting. You know, it's just common sense that, you know, we have problems with China on trade because of their predatory and criminal trade practices. Well, of course, other countries also have those same problems, even worse than we do. So, you know, China's not going to be able to stitch up this global coalition that everyone's talking about against the U.S. to reorder the trade order. It's not going to happen. If anybody is going to reorder global trade, it's President Trump with all of these deals that he is now stitching together. And that's going to isolate China because remember, Trump said those countries that deal with us first get the best deals. China is at the end of the tail because they are intransigent.
And Japan, who was in D.C., Japan. President Trump is ordering the Commerce Department to launch an investigation into possible tariffs on all U.S. critical mineral imports. This is after China curbed exports of rare earth minerals, which we need for U.S. defense. Xi Jinping's family reportedly holds billion-dollar investments in Chinese rare earth mining plants. And Bloomberg says, they actually said back in 2012, they had an 18% indirect stake in one company, $2 billion in assets, Gordon.
Yes.
Connect the dots with that, if you don't mind.
Well, this is the whole issue of corruption. And, you know, the Communist Party likes to say, well, yeah, they're minor officials who are corrupt. But here you're talking at the top of the political system, Cheryl, and it just shows how bad this is. Now, of course, with this export ban or this embargo, you know, we're starting to get weak in the knees. But we got to remember, China did this to Japan in 2010. And the Chinese embargo collapsed in a couple months because the Japanese found so many ways around it. And we forget one thing. Yes, we need to buy, but the Chinese need to sell. and we're going to get these rare earths one way or the other. We might pay a little bit more, but then again, we might start mining and processing them here, and that's going to be good for the United States.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, when he was on this program with Maria, said exactly that. He said they need us a lot more than we need them, and I'm paraphrasing that. But the other thing is what China just did is with Boeing, and that hurt Boeing's stock because they're telling all these Chinese carriers, don't take delivery of your Boeing orders. That hurts Boeing because they don't get paid until the aircraft is actually delivered.
Right. Boeing will have a little bit of turbulence, but remember, Boeing is going to sell these planes. If China doesn't buy them, they're going to sell them to India, which is actually talking to Boeing about taking these extra planes. There's only so much capacity in the world to build planes. If Airbus sells more to China, and that's a big if, but if they do, Boeing's going to sell to Airbus's customers because Airbus's customers are not going to wait 10 years to get a plane. So this is not going to really hurt Boeing too much in the long run. And if President Trump, if he starts putting an embargo on the sales of parts to China, because that is the natural step, then you're going to have a lot of planes in China are not going to be flying pretty soon. So, this is not very good for China because they haven't thought this out.
Yeah, Airbus does have more of a hold on the Chinese market than Boeing does. And I know Boeing was looking for the opportunity, but well, here we are. Mehek.
And Gordon, I have to go back to what you start your op-ed with. There are no winners and losers in trade wars, but you're calling China to be a loser today. I want to go to national security implications. We're talking about rare earth minerals. Where can the United States go? Because I think people need to understand what the national security is at stake when we rely on China, and then the United States has options. Can you kind of walk through that?
Yeah, well, we only have one rare earth mine. It's in California. But that production is processed in China. So what we can do, two things. First of all, open up federal lands for mining of rare earths and processing in the United States. Also, Saskatchewan, in our 51st state, they've got minerals up the gazoo. So clearly, there's a lot that we can do here. And so there's just a very simple answer. We just do what the Japanese did in 2010. You start to buy elsewhere. You buy from the Chinese directly because the state enterprises need to sell, and they'll do it surreptitiously. Also, you just find substitutes for rare earths, which the Japanese did.
And the Ukrainians, there's a rare earth mineral story there as well, which President Trump has pursued. Yeah.
Right.
Gordon, it's great to see you as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah.